moments that no matter how hard you try to describe them, you are really incapable of finding the words to describe whatever it is that happened. I think about the fall of 1990. I was in my hometown of Buckland, Kansas, and I was at the U. Now, that sounds really cool and all, but it's on Main Street, the corner of Center Street and Main Street, and the U is the old Universal gas station. It's actually right by my dad's barbershop, or was my dad's barbershop. And the U, it was closed way before I was born, but they pulled the pumps and they kind of leveled out the concrete, and that's where we would all hang out on Friday and Saturday nights. We'd sit on the hoods of our car or the tailgates of our trucks, and we'd shoot the breeze till the wee hours of the morning. And so there was this one night, it was actually Saturday night, Sunday morning, that we were all sitting around, and out of the western sky came a ball of fire. Now, when I say a ball of fire, when we think about like a flying star or a meteor, it's almost like we see a marble in the sky. This was not like that. This is like beach ball size if a flying star is a marble. I mean, it just was so incredibly huge. And against the dark night sky of orange and yellow and the tail of fire, I really can't even describe it other than after it happened, there was like dead silence. I mean, there was probably 6 or 8 of us that were all there, and we were just like stunned by what we saw. And then finally somebody said, "Let's go." And so we got in our cars, and we piled up in like 2 cars, and we drove as fast as we could. I'm sure we broke the law, fast as we could to the northeast, so that we could see whatever exploded wherever. And after 15 to 20 miles, we saw nothing. And then we began to think, what in the world was this? Now, a few days later, it actually came out in the newspaper that it was a Russian cosmonaut spaceship re-entering Earth's atmosphere over Kansas. Now, I could sit here all day and tell you what that looked like, but mere words would not be sufficient for that. There's another moment in my life that I would love to tell you how incredible it was, but again, words are insufficient. I think about, it was February of 2000, and we had a friend that played basketball for Oklahoma University, and we lived up in the Kansas City area, and so every time he was within a couple of hours, we would go, and he would give us player tickets for games. And so we ended up, in the middle of the week, we went up to Lincoln, Nebraska to watch OU play, and he forgot to get us tickets. So we ended up paying $5 to get in for each of the seats, which was about $20, no big deal. And after the game, he was like so apologetic. He's like, "I'm so sorry, I'm so sorry, I'm so sorry." And I said, "All will be forgiven if this Sunday you get us floor seats at KU." Now, if you know anything about basketball, like this is like their court itself says James Naismith Court, who is the founder of basketball, and Allen Fieldhouse is like one of the probably top 5 places to watch a basketball game ever. And so when we got player tickets, it said row 1. I can't even begin to describe the pageantry. I'm not even a KU fan. But the pageantry and the energy and the excitement that was in that, and what it was like to look just feet in front of me and see James Naismith Court. And I could spend all day telling you all about it, but words are not sufficient. And maybe you have moments like that. And maybe it's shooting a buck for the first time, and that moment is ingrained into your mind. Maybe it's a recent moment. I know for some, when I said this today, in fact, I'll even just say, if this is not you, you snooze, you lose today. But did anybody get just even a glimpse of the sunrise today? I know you're the 11 o'clock crowd, so a few of you maybe. But the reality is, it is one of those that words cannot even begin to describe that. Now, with that, I think about Jesus' followers. I think about those dozen guys that got a front row seat to Jesus' life and ministry. I think about those guys that had moments that didn't make it into the Bible. Actually, I didn't say this at first service, but I'll go ahead and say this now. Basically, what we have from the four Gospels, if we were to put it in chronological order, is about a month in the life of Jesus. And that's enough. But they had more moments that they could share that they could probably spend all day trying to describe what those moments were like, but words were insufficient. Imagine having the front row seat. You have the front row seat, and Jesus says, let's get in the boat, let's go to the other side of the sea, and as you're on the trip in the middle of the Sea of Galilee, a storm comes up. And as the storm comes up and the waves start to crash and the water is going into the boat and there's thunder and there's lightning and there's wind and there's rain, and you're beginning to wonder if you're going to die. In fact, Jesus is that guy that's sleeping through this whole thing. And he's sleeping through all this. They wake him up and say, don't you care that we're about to die? And Jesus, this is a picture in my mind. The picture in my mind is not peace be still, but hey, shh. And immediately it stops. That moment, I can't even begin to imagine in my mind what it was like. And then as they're processing that moment, as they're kind of reeling with what kind of man is this that can command the weather, and the weather obeys immediately. And then it goes on to say that they crossed to the other side, and they ended up in Garrisons. Garrisons, or Gadara, is part of a collection of Gentile communities that were on the other side of the Sea of Galilee. It's called the Decapolis. There were 10 of them all together. And as they get there, it's not like this wonderful, calm beach. In fact, it's cliffs and rocks and hills. And the crowd that was in Capernaum that was pressing up against them, well, there's no crowd. There's no welcoming committee. In fact, there's just one. One there, and we're not going to say that he was there to greet them. Let's go ahead and begin to look at this moment in the life and ministry of Jesus. We're going to be in Mark chapter 5, and I'm going to start with verse 2 here. It says, and when Jesus had stepped out of the boat, immediately there met him out of the tombs a man with an unclean spirit. Some of your Bibles might actually say a man who was possessed by a demon. He lived among the tombs, and no one could bind him anymore, not even with a chain. For he had often been bound with shackles and chains, and wrenched the chains apart, and broke the shackles into pieces. No one had the strength to subdue him. Night and day, among the tombs and on the mountains, he was always crying out and cutting himself with stones. I'm going to stop here and just kind of take a look at this particular point in Jesus' life and ministry. In fact, one of the things that we have to say is that demonic forces are very real. And what we can see about demonic forces is they're really not to be messed with. I'll just tell you, there was a time when I was in high school, there was a guy that showed up, there was a group of us together, and when I say white as a ghost, he was white as a ghost. And it ended up that he was playing a Ouija board with some friends. And I've never done this, never planned to do this, but he said that he asked a question, and the response that he got back was back off. Back off. And so he kept asking the question again. And the next answer he got was, you're dead. Now, he's still alive, but it was definitely enough for him to kind of go, whoa, this is probably something I shouldn't be messing with. And I know for me, I looked at that, and I can't say I was really walking with Jesus at the time. I'm like, yeah, don't want to go there. I actually had a guy one summer who came from one of the Bible colleges when I was up in Missouri, and he worked with our youth for the summer. And this actually happened when he had gone back to college. Some parents came to me and said, hey, just want to let you know that he told our kids that at night when he can't sleep, he tells demons that it's okay to come in so that he can overpower them. So in case you're wondering if this is a good idea or not, don't do this. In fact, that's one of the things you go to the Old Testament. We're just not even supposed to go there at all. That's a place that we just don't go down that road. So the reality is, though, this man had become completely overcome by demonic forces in his life. Now, I think sometimes in the church we give too much credit and too much power to demons. I'll never forget Zach, our oldest, and he's in ministry, and he's got kids and stuff like that, and so he can deal with this with his own kids now. But I remember one time Zach got in trouble because he didn't do his chores, and he just was like, Dad, I think I've got the demon of laziness. I'm not going to say what happened next, but I was not thoroughly convinced that he had the demon of laziness as much as he was just so disobedient and wanted to get out of it at that particular time. But the reality is, we can become enamored with this, but we also need to recognize the power. This man was completely overtaken by this. I have probably 2 or 3 experiences in my life that if you had to press me, yes or no, demon-possessed or not demon-possessed, I would probably have to err on the side of probably demon-possessed. Now, that's a rarity, but that still happens. But the reality is, sin and evil can overtake people. And it's a very, very powerful thing. And if we're not careful, it can lead us to a very, very dark place. In fact, the reality is no one ever wants to go there. I mean, think about kids when they're playing make-believe, when they're like little kids and stuff like that, and they say, well, I want to be this and I want to be this. No kid ever stands up and goes, ooh, I want to be the adulterer. I want to be the drug addict. I call gossip. I call liar. I call things. They don't imagine going, nobody imagines going there. But if we're not careful, whether it be trauma or whether it be a string of bad choices and decisions, or maybe even we're just kind of enamored with the dark side. Sometimes we go there. And in fact, I've said this before, and I don't know who said this originally because there's a lot of people on the internet who have said this. And so I'm just going to say whoever said this is a whole lot smarter than me. But they said this: sin will take you farther than you want to go, keep you longer than you want to stay, and cost you more than you want to pay. It's going to take us to a really, really bad place. And there's consequences, and there's really a goal to sin. But before we talk about the goal of sin, I think it's important to identify what sin is. Sin ultimately is an act, and we could bring attitude into this, but it's an act against the character, divine will, and law of God. And I was actually listening to Francis Chan, one of his most recent books, and one of the things that he said in this book is, I don't get the opportunity to decide what sin is and what sin isn't. This is ultimately God. God gets to decide. Culture doesn't get to decide. Politics don't get to decide, or politicians don't get to decide. Ultimately, God decides what sin is. But one of the things that we begin to find is really kind of what happens when sin comes into your life. And one of them is this: sin leads to social isolation. We don't even realize it. In fact, I'll even say if you feel yourself becoming more and more isolated from people, that might be a result of sin. It really has a good, firm grip in your life. But this man, this man that was possessed by a demon, he was forced to live a life of isolation because that's the only place he could be. I mean, he had to live in a cemetery because it was the only place that he could be. Also, it says that he was screaming and yelling and cutting himself night and day. So the reality is, and again, maybe you don't cut, but you might understand this, is that sin leads to destructive patterns. Destructive patterns ruin relationships and ultimately destroy lives. In fact, I'll even go as far as to say the end game of sin. The end game of sin is always destruction. Satan's goal is always to destroy the very image of God that resides in every single one of us. That's his goal. That's his end game. And so whether it's destroying relationships or marriages or families or institutions, this is ultimately Satan's end game. Now with that, this is not the end of the story. Like if I were to say this is the end of the story and this is the end of the sermon, it might be a short sermon, but the reality is it kind of ends on a sour note. But there's actually something really cool that happens here. It is that Jesus begins to show who he is. Now let's look at verse 6. And when he saw Jesus from afar, he ran and fell down before him. I don't think this was worship. I ultimately think that what was happening here is that he was acknowledging who Jesus is and his power. But then it goes on to say, and crying out with a loud voice, he said, "What have you to do with me, Jesus, Son of Most High God? I adjure you, adjure you by God, do not torment me." Now, I think when this guy said this, he wasn't saying it's like, oh, hi, Jesus. I don't think that's the voice that is coming out of his mouth. Has anybody seen the Spider-Man with venom in it? That sound, that throaty grr voice coming out. I imagine that is what's coming out. And he's asking Jesus, don't torment me. And then it goes on in verse 8, for he, Jesus, was saying to him, "Come out of the man, you unclean spirit." The spirit was not obeying. And Jesus asked him, "What is your name?" He replied, "My name is Legion, for we are many." In the Roman army, a legion could be up to 6,000 soldiers. Now, I don't know that there were 6,000 demons in there, but again, he's giving the picture and illusion that there's many demons living inside the man. And he begged him earnestly not to send him out of the country. Now, a great herd of pigs was feeding there on the hillside, and they begged him, saying, "Send us to the pigs, let us enter them." Now, before I read verse 13, some of you may have been around pigs before. What do pigs do when they're in distress? They squeal. They writhe out in pain. And so think about that noise here for a moment as we get into verse 13, because this is a violent picture. So he gave them permission, and the unclean spirits came out and entered the pigs, and the herd, numbering about 2,000, rushed down the steep bank into the sea and were drowned in the sea. So what do we learn? Pigs can't fly. I mean, seriously, because they were the rocks and the cliffs and so on like that. But I want you to think about 2,000 pigs writhing and squealing as they fall down the cliffs, roll, and eventually go into the sea and drown. Now, I think Jesus does this for a very specific purpose, and this is a violent picture, but he wants to show people the destructive nature of sin. But what Jesus does here, Jesus proves that he is Lord over the demonic powers of this world. The ones who understood the lordship of Jesus They were not the followers of Jesus at that point in time. The ones who understood the true power of Jesus were the demons living inside the man. In fact, in the book of James, it says that the demons believe that there is one God, and they shudder. And so Jesus displays himself to be Lord over the spiritual forces of this world. Interestingly, there were some onlookers. They were the shepherds of the pigs. And this is what it says in verse 14. It says, the herdsmen fled and told it in the city and in the country, and people came to see what it was that had happened, and they came to Jesus and saw the demon-possessed man, the one who had the legion, sitting there, clothed and in his right mind, and they were afraid. And those who had seen it described to them what had happened to the demon-possessed man and to the pigs. And I think what we have to understand is there are two pictures. There are two scenes. The very first scene is a man who is naked, and he is cutting himself, and he is crying out, and he's by himself because he really cannot exist in any other type of setting other than to be away from people, and he is completely filled with thousands upon thousands of demons. And the very next scene, what we find is that he's sitting there, and he's calm, and he's clothed, and he's in his right mind, and he's surrounded by people. I mean, there's a stark comparison or contrast between what was and what is, and now people have a visual representation. I think people understood. They knew about this guy, and they knew what he was like, and they knew what he was doing, and they knew the destruction and the hold that the demons had on him, and then they come upon him, and it's completely changed. And we use the word deliverance, but Jesus gave this man his freedom. He gave him his life back, and it really gives us kind of irrefutable evidence of who Jesus is and what Jesus is able to do. And this is it right here. I think what we got to understand is Jesus' power to restore is greater than Satan's power to destroy. I'm going to say that again. Jesus' power to restore is greater than Satan's power to destroy. And Jim talked about this a little bit last week, but I think it bears mentioning again. What is the news cycle today? The news cycle is everything wants to destroy you. The environment wants to destroy you. A virus wants to destroy you. A vaccine wants to destroy you. A political party, a political ideology, your government wants to destroy you. A race wants to destroy you. A religion wants to destroy you. There's all of these things, and these are up for debate. Everybody wants to debate these. I will tell you that there is one reality that is not debatable. This is not up for debate. The thing that is not up for debate is that Satan, he wants to kill, steal, and destroy. That's his goal. But we're armed with a different knowledge. We're armed with a knowledge that no matter how great Satan's power to destroy really is, Jesus' power to restore lives is greater. Jesus' power to restore marriage and to restore lives and to restore families and to restore cultures is greater than Satan's power to destroy. And while that is great power, Jesus' power is always greater. And so with that, armed with that knowledge, we have to make a decision. In fact, if you look at verses 17 and 18, we find that there's a couple of different reactions to Jesus being Lord over. And it's this. And they began to beg Jesus to depart from their region. And as he was getting into the boat, the man who had been possessed with demons begged him that he might be with him. Here's reality. some people reject the lordship of Jesus. Even the visual evidence of knowing what this man was and what he is now, even knowing that Jesus has power to do all of that, there were many armed with the knowledge that Jesus is Lord that said, you know what? We want you to leave. And why do we do that? I think some people have all the knowledge that they need, but the knowledge that they have also comes with the reality of, I have to sacrifice and I have to change, and Jesus is going to adjust my life. And so they look at that and say, no matter who he is, I'm not ready to go there yet. And that still happens today. But there's something else that happens. This guy sees Jesus getting in the boat and essentially says, got room for one more? He's ready to go. He wants to go with Jesus. I think there's an issue of thankfulness. I think there's an issue of gratitude here. But understanding his life, Jesus is the only thing that has ever worked. Everything that everybody else has tried hadn't worked. This has been the one thing that has worked in his life. And now Jesus is leaving, and there's fear of what happens. What happens when Jesus leaves? You see, he wanted to capture the moment. And we do the same thing. I think about, I've been in ministry a long time, and I did this when I was a kid. Went to church camp. I've seen kids genuinely fearful on the last day of church camp because they know they got to go home. Because they're afraid of going back to normal and going back to life and going back to temptation and going back to all the crazy of life. What's going to happen when I no longer have this moment? And we do that. In fact, I always say, the holy huddle is always the best place to be. Around Christians, and we're talking, and we're praying, and we're holding each other accountable. It's harder out there. So let's see what Jesus does with the request of, hey, let me go with you. Let's look at verse 19. And he did not permit him, but said to him, go home to your friends and tell them how much the Lord has done for you, and how he has had mercy on you. And he went away and began to proclaim in the Decapolis how much Jesus had done for him, and everyone marveled. So this is basically what Jesus says. Go public with how Jesus has changed your story. Go public with what Jesus has done. In fact, every other time Jesus tells people, don't say anything. Now in the Gentile area, he says, go public with this. Go tell everyone about this. And you know what Jesus wants us to do? He wants us to go public with how he has changed our story. And here's the important thing. He gets to be the hero, not us. We put the spotlight on Jesus, not on us and our sin and how bad things are. But we can say, this is how Jesus has changed our life. Now, we would love to hear your story. There's actually a place on our website that you can actually go to that you can share how Jesus has changed your story. We would love to hear that. But there are people around you who need to hear that. They need to hear that Jesus changed your story, that your life was once a wreck, and it's at where it's at right now because of Jesus. There's one more item here. The more I read the book of Mark, the more I'm convinced that Jesus is not playing to the crowds. I mean, the crowds are always around him, but I don't believe that Jesus is always playing to the crowds. It's not like he's getting together with all of his guys and saying, hey, we had 1,000 people in the crowd today. That's what preachers do. I think he was playing to a smaller crowd. Those 12 that got to share those moments, that got the front row seat, those 12 maybe Jesus is really wanting them to grapple with who he is. In fact, we're kind of moving into a place in Mark that I think Jesus is leading them to a big question of, who do you say that I am? But imagine the last 24 hours of their lives. They're in a boat. They're in a storm. There's waves. There's thunder. There's lightning. There's water coming up into the boat. There's this massive storm. Jesus tells the storm to be quiet. And immediately it's calm. And it says that they reacted with, who is this man? That even the wind and the waves obey his voice. And right after that, pigs can't fly. Demons go into the heart of the sea. Even the demonic, sinful world obeys Jesus. Again, forced to come to grips with who is he. Reality? Jesus wants us to grapple with that question as well. Who is this man? And how you answer who is this man changes everything. Join me in prayer. Father in heaven, thank you. Thank you that you sent your Son and that he is greater. Thank you in Jesus' name. Amen.